Well, find out. And find out if she has anything to do with this lockdown. While the executives scrambled to figure out what was happening, something else was brewing. The PR department had started to notice something alarming on social media. Someone had posted a video the night before and it was spreading fast. Jenny from PR burst into the conference call, her face pale. "Sir, we have a problem. A big problem." "Add it to the list," Richard muttered. "No, you need to see this right now." She shared her screen and everyone on the call watched as a video began to play. It showed the first-class lounge at the airport. Derek and Amanda were clearly visible, along with an older woman in a modest coat. The audio was surprisingly clear. They could hear every word of the conversation, hear the skepticism in Derek's voice, the condescension in Amanda's tone. They watched as Margaret was turned away from the lounge despite showing her ticket multiple times. They saw the smirks, the whispers, the obvious judgment based entirely on how she was dressed. The video had been viewed over 2 million times. The comment section was brutal. "This is disgusting. They judged her because of her clothes? I'm never flying with Apex Airlines again." This is exactly what's wrong with customer service today. Treating people like garbage because they don't look rich enough. The hashtag Apex discrimination was trending nationwide. Richard felt sick. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday," Jenny said. "And it gets worse. Someone did some digging." "That woman? The one they humiliated?" "That's Dr. Margaret Chen." "The same Margaret Chen who has administrative access to our systems?" Gary asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The very same. And if you think that's interesting, wait until you hear the rest." Jenny pulled up another document on her screen. Dr. Margaret Chen wasn't just any employee. She was our chief technology officer for 30 years. She built our entire computer infrastructure from the ground up. Every system we use, every protocol, every security measure, she designed it all. The silence on the call was deafening. She built the reservation system, the security protocols, the building access systems, everything, Jenny continued. When she retired 5 years ago, the board granted her lifetime administrative access as an honor. It was the previous CEO's decision, recognizing her decades of service to the company. Richard closed his eyes. He'd taken over as CEO 3 years ago. Nobody had told him about Dr. Chen. Nobody had mentioned that a retired employee still had access to their most critical systems. "So you're telling me," Richard said slowly, "that we humiliated the woman who literally built this company's entire technological foundation, and now she's locked us out of our own building." "That appears to be the situation, yes," Gary confirmed. Another call was coming in on Richard's phone. It was from the mayor's office, then another from the local news station, then another from the Regional Aviation Authority. The story was everywhere now, and everyone wanted a statement. Outside the building, the crowd of employees had grown to over 300 people. News vans were pulling up. Reporters were interviewing staff members, asking them what they knew about the viral video and the mysterious lockdown. "Do you think the two are connected?" one reporter asked a group of employees. "Has to be," someone replied. "This can't be a coincidence." Kevin from accounting was scrolling through his phone, reading about Dr. Chen's history with the company. "Oh man," he said to the people around him. "Did you guys know she started here when the company only had like 50 employees? She was one of the originals. She helped make Apex what it is today. And we treated her like that?" Lisa said, watching the video again on her phone. "That's so messed up." Inside a small apartment across town, Margaret was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the news on her laptop. They were showing aerial footage of the Apex headquarters, with hundreds of employees gathered outside. The building looked imposing and impenetrable, exactly as she'd designed it to be when security was fully activated. Her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and smiled slightly. Richard Thornton, the CEO himself. She let it ring 3 more times before answering. "This is Margaret. Dr. Chen, this is Richard Thornton, CEO of Apex Airlines." His voice was strained, trying to sound professional despite the obvious stress. "I believe we need to talk." "Yes, I believe we do. Did you initiate the lockdown of our headquarters?" "I did." Richard took a deep breath. "May I ask why?" "I think you know why, Mr. Thornton. Have you seen the video?" There was a pause. Yes, I have. And I want to apologize on behalf of the company for how you were treated." "Your apology is premature," Margaret said calmly. "You don't even know me. You don't know what I did for this company. You're apologizing because you're locked out of your building and you need me to fix it. Dr. Chen, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset, Mr. Thornton. I'm disappointed. I spent 30 years building systems and protocols that were supposed to ensure every passenger, regardless of how they looked or how much money they appeared to have, was treated with dignity and respect. Yesterday I learned that those values are no longer being honored. We can address this. We can retrain the staff involved. No, Margaret interrupted gently but firmly. We're going to do more than that. But first you and I need to have a conversation. In person, of course. Where would you like to meet? Outside the headquarters building? In front of all your employees? In front of the media? In 1 hour, Richard hesitated. Dr. Chen, perhaps we could meet somewhere more private. Those are my terms, Mr. Thornton, 1 hour. Outside the building. Or I'll keep those doors locked. And you can explain to the Aviation Authority why Apex Airlines has ceased operations for the day. She hung up before he could respond. Margaret stood up from her table and walked to her bedroom. She opened her closet and pulled out the same navy coat she'd worn yesterday, the same comfortable shoes. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it as herself. Not as someone trying to impress anyone or prove anything about her appearance. She caught sight of a photo on her dresser. Thomas smiling at the camera during their anniversary dinner 5 years ago, just months before he got sick. "Wish me luck," she whispered to the photo. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she saw it was from Jenny in PR. "Dr. Chen, I don't know if you'll read this, but what happened to you was wrong. Some of us remember who you are and what you did for this company. Thank you for standing up for what's right." Margaret smiled. Maybe not everything had changed after all. Maybe there were still people there who remembered what Apex Airlines was supposed to stand for. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. It was time to remind everyone else. 27 years ago, Apex Airlines was barely more than a dream. The company operated out of a converted warehouse with 15 employees, 3 planes, and enough determination to move mountains. Margaret Chen was employee number 8. She'd been 25 years old, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in computer science and a head full of ideas about how technology could transform the airline industry. Back then, airlines still used paper tickets and manual booking systems. The idea of computerizing everything seemed almost science fiction. Her job interview had been conducted by the founder himself, Walter Price, an ex-pilot who'd mortgaged his house to start the airline. He'd sat across from her in a folding chair, surrounded by boxes and half-assembled desks. "I need someone who can build us a reservation system," Walter had said. "Something that can grow with us. Something reliable. Can you do that?" Margaret had looked around at the chaos of the startup office and smiled. "I can do better than that. I can build you something that will last decades." She'd kept that promise. In those early days, Margaret worked 16-hour days, sometimes sleeping on a cot in the office. She coded by hand, testing every line, every function, every possible scenario. But she wasn't just building a computer system. She was building the foundation of what the company would become. Walter would often sit with her late at night, bringing coffee and asking questions about how everything worked. During one of those late-night conversations, he'd shared his vision with her. "You know what sets us apart?" he'd said. "We treat people right. Every passenger, whether they paid $50 or $500, they're our responsibility. They're trusting us with their lives when they step on those planes. That means something." Margaret had never forgotten those words. When she designed the customer service protocols, when she built the training systems, when she created every piece of the digital infrastructure, she'd coded those values into the very fabric of the company. Walter had recognized her contributions early. Within 5 years, she'd been promoted to Chief Technology Officer. By the time she was 35, she was one of the most respected technology leaders in the airline industry. Other companies tried to recruit her with offers of double or triple her salary, but she always stayed. Apex was her home. She'd met Thomas during her 10th year at the company. He'd been a passenger on one of their flights, and his laptop had crashed right before an important presentation. The flight attendant had mentioned they had a technology expert on staff, and Margaret had helped him recover his files. 3 months later, they'd gone on their first date. A year after that, they were married. Thomas had his home office in his pajamas. Richard was on a video call with his entire crisis management team. except half of them couldn't even access their work computers because all the systems were down. "Talk to me, people," Richard said, running his hand through his hair. "What are we dealing with here?" The IT director, a stressed-looking man named Gary, was frantically typing on his laptop. "Sir, this is a complete system override. Someone with top-level administrative access has locked us out of everything. And I mean everything. Building security, internal networks, even the backup servers. Can't you override it?" "We're trying. But whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They've blocked every backdoor, every emergency protocol. It's like they designed the system and knew every possible way we might try to get back in." Richard felt his stomach drop. Could this be a hack? Foreign actors? Ransomware? "No, sir," Gary said, looking at his screen with something like awe. "This came from inside. Someone used legitimate administrative credentials, the highest level we have." "Who has those credentials?" Gary pulled up a list on his screen. "According to our records, only 5 people have that level of access. You, me, the CFO, the head of security, and—" He paused, his eyes widening. "That's strange. What?" "There's one more name on here, Dr. Margaret Chen, but that doesn't make sense. She retired 5 years ago." Richard frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Who is she?" "I'd have to look into her file, but if she's been retired for 5 years, her access should have been revoked. I don't understand why she still has administrative rights." Understood her dedication to Apex. He'd been there through every crisis, every expansion, every late night when a system crashed and she had to fix it. He'd been there when she designed the security protocols that made their buildings among the safest in the industry. He'd been there when she'd implemented the automated check-in systems that became standard across the airline world. But Thomas had also been the one to remind her that companies were made of people, not just systems. When she got too caught up in the technical details, he'd bring her back to the human element. "Remember," he'd say, "all of this technology is supposed to make life better for people. The moment it starts doing the opposite, that's when you know something's gone wrong." The employees who'd been at Apex during those years remembered Margaret differently than the current leadership did. To them, she wasn't just the tech person. She was the one who'd fight for better working conditions, who'd personally train new hires, who'd remember everyone's names and ask about their families. Kevin from accounting had been one of her hires, actually. 15 years ago, when he was a nervous 22-year-old fresh out of college, Margaret had interviewed him. She'd seen something in him beyond his resume, beyond his lack of experience. She'd given him a chance, and he'd worked his way up ever since. Now, standing outside the locked building with hundreds of others, Kevin was telling anyone who would listen about Dr. Chen. "She used to do these spot checks," he was saying to a group of newer employees who'd never met her. "She'd show up at random airports dressed in regular clothes and go through the whole passenger experience. Check-in, security, boarding, everything. Then she'd come back and tell us exactly where the problems were and how to fix them." "Why'd she retire?" someone asked. Kevin's expression grew sad. "Her husband got sick. Cancer. She took early retirement to spend time with him. He passed away about 2 years ago. I sent flowers to the funeral. She sent me a thank you card, handwritten. That's the kind of person she is." Lisa, who'd started at Apex only 3 years ago, was listening with growing amazement. "So she built all of this and nobody told us? I had no idea." "The new management doesn't care about history," an older employee said bitterly. "They care about profit margins and efficiency reports. All that stuff about values and treating people right. They think it's old-fashioned." Inside his car driving toward the headquarters building, Richard was getting a crash course on Dr. Margaret Chen from his assistant, who'd pulled her entire personnel file. "Sir, you need to understand the scope of what she did," his assistant was saying over the car's speaker system. "She didn't just write some code. She architected the entire technological infrastructure of this company, the reservation system that processes millions of bookings a year. She built that. The security system that's currently keeping us locked out, she designed that. The customer database, the flight management software, the crew scheduling system, all of it. She created it all." "Why wasn't I briefed on this when I took over as CEO?" Richard asked. "I don't know, sir." But according to her file, when she retired, the board passed a special resolution. They granted her lifetime administrative access as a symbolic gesture. Walter Price, the founder, he personally wrote the recommendation. Let me read you what he wrote. "Dr. Margaret Chen is not just an employee. She is the guardian of our company's values and the architect of our future. Her access to our systems should remain as long as those systems exist, as a reminder that this company was built on principles, not just profits. Richard was quiet for a moment. Did I ever meet Walter Price? He passed away 6 months before you joined the company, sir. So the institutional knowledge died with him. It would appear so. Yes. By the time Richard arrived at the headquarters, the scene looked like something from a news broadcast. At least 5 news vans were parked along the street. Reporters were interviewing employees, and a crowd of several hundred people had gathered. Security was trying to maintain order, but it was clear this was bigger than anyone had anticipated. Richard got out of his car and immediately spotted the cameras turning toward him. He straightened his tie and walked toward the main entrance, where his executive team was waiting. "Where's Dr. Chen?" he asked. "Not here yet," Gary from IT replied. "Sir, we need to talk about what we're going to say. The media's already running stories about the connection between the video and the lockdown. What's the current spin? That we're a company that discriminates based on appearance and that Dr. Chen is exposing our toxic culture." Richard winced. "How bad is the stock price?" "Down 18% since the market opened an hour ago." A black sedan pulled up to the curb, and Richard watched as an older woman in a navy coat stepped out. She was alone, carrying no briefcase or bag, just her phone in her hand. But the way she carried herself, the calm confidence in her movements, made it clear this was someone who was used to being in control. Margaret walked straight toward the building, and the crowd seemed to part naturally for her. Employees who recognized her nodded respectfully. Some even said hello. She returned each greeting with a small smile. When she reached Richard, she extended her hand. "Mr. Thornton, thank you for meeting me." He shook her hand, noting the firm grip. "Dr. Chen, I think we have a lot to discuss." "Indeed we do. But first, I think your employees deserve to know what's happening, don't you?" Before Richard could respond, Margaret turned to face the crowd. Someone must have alerted the media, because suddenly all the cameras were pointing in their direction. The buzz of conversation died down as people realized something was about to happen. Margaret didn't raise her voice, but somehow it carried across the crowd. "My name is Dr. Margaret Chen. Some of you know me. Many of you don't. I worked for Apex Airlines for 30 years, and I retired 5 years ago. Yesterday, I attempted to use the first-class lounge at our airport, and I was turned away because your employees judged me based on my appearance rather than my ticket." She paused, letting that sink in. "I didn't lock down this building because I was embarrassed. I didn't do it out of spite or revenge. I did it because I needed your attention. I needed the leadership of this company to understand that we have lost our way." Richard felt hundreds of eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do. "When I built the systems that run this company," Margaret continued, "I didn't just build computers and software. I tried to build in our values. Values that said every passenger matters, every employee matters. Dignity and respect aren't luxuries reserved for first class. They're basic human rights." Someone in the crowd started recording on their phone. Within seconds, dozens of others did the same. "Yesterday I was treated as less than human because I didn't look wealthy enough. But here's what your employees didn't know about me." She turned to look directly at Richard. "I built this company's technology. I mentored hundreds of employees. I dedicated 3 decades of my life to making sure Apex Airlines stood for something more than just profit." The silence was absolute. Even the reporters had stopped asking questions, just recording and watching. "So here's what's going to happen," Margaret said, her voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Mr. Thornton and I are going to have a conversation about the culture of this company. We're going to discuss whether the values I helped establish still matter. And then, depending on what happens in that conversation, I'll decide whether to restore access to the building." She looked at the crowd of employees. "You all chose to work for Apex Airlines. Some of you have been here for years. Others are new. But every single one of you represents this company to the world. The question is, what kind of company do you want to represent?" Margaret turned back to Richard. "Shall we talk, Mr. Thornton?" Richard nodded, his throat suddenly dry. This wasn't going to be a simple negotiation. This was going to be a reckoning. They stood on the front steps of the building, Richard and Margaret, with the entire world watching. Richard had suggested they move somewhere private, but Margaret had shaken her head firmly. Whatever was going to be said needed to be said in the open, where everyone could hear. Richard cleared his throat. "Dr. Chen, I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened to you yesterday. The treatment you received was completely unacceptable. Do you know why it was unacceptable? Margaret asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. Because you were a paying customer with a valid ticket? That's part of it. But let me ask you something else. Would it have been acceptable if I wasn't a former executive? What if I was just an ordinary passenger who'd saved up her money to buy a first-class ticket as a once-in-a-lifetime experience? Would the apology be the same? Richard opened his mouth and closed it. The cameras were recording every second of this. Margaret reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folder. I did some research last night. It wasn't hard. Most of it was publicly available on social media. Your employees, Mr. Thornton, some of them post quite freely about their views on passengers. She opened the folder and began to read. Quote, another day, another broke person trying to sneak into first class. Do they really think we can't tell? Posted by one of your gate agents 6 months ago. Or this one. If you can't afford to dress like you belong in first class, maybe stick to economy. That was posted 3 weeks ago by a supervisor. Richard felt his face grow hot. Dr. Chen, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, because you weren't looking. Let me show you something else. She pulled out another set of papers. These are customer complaints filed over the past 2 years. Complaints about discrimination, about passengers being treated poorly based on their appearance, their accent, their age. Do you know how many of these complaints were escalated to executive level? How many? 0, not a single one made it past middle management. They were all marked as resolved at the local level, which usually meant the customer received a generic apology email and maybe a small travel credit. Nothing changed. The crowd of employees had grown silent, listening to every word. Some were nodding. Others looked uncomfortable. Margaret's voice remained steady, but there was passion behind it now. When I designed the customer service training system, I built in escalation protocols. If certain keywords appeared in complaints, discrimination, bias, unfair treatment, they were supposed to trigger automatic reviews. Someone disabled those protocols about 18 months ago. Do you know why? Richard looked at his executive team, but they all avoided his eyes. No, I don't. I do. I checked the system logs before I locked everything down. The change was made by someone in efficiency review. The note said the escalation protocols were causing too many complaints to reach executive level, and it was wasting management time, so they simply turned them off. The implications hung in the air like a weight. They'd deliberately hidden complaints from leadership to make things run more smoothly. Dr. Chen, Richard said, his voice strained, I give you my word that I knew nothing about this, and I promise you there will be consequences. Consequences for whom? Margaret asked. The person who disabled the protocols? The employees who posted discriminatory comments? Or the executive team that created an environment where efficiency mattered more than ethics? That hit like a punch to the gut. Richard knew she was right. This wasn't just about a few bad employees. This was systemic. Tell me something, Mr. Thornton, Margaret continued. When you became CEO 3 years ago, did anyone brief you on the company's core values? On the principles that Walter Price founded this company on? I received the standard onboarding materials, Richard said, which probably focused on financial targets, market share, operational efficiency. It wasn't a question. Margaret knew. Did anyone tell you about Walter's philosophy? About how he believed that an airline's success should be measured not just in profits, but in how many people it served well? Did anyone show you the letter he wrote to every new employee, explaining that we weren't just moving people from point A to point B, but that we were carrying people's hopes, dreams, and important moments? Richard shook his head slowly. No one showed me that. Because somewhere along the way we stopped caring about that. We started caring about quarterly earnings and cost-cutting and beating the competition. All important things, certainly. But not at the expense of the soul of this company. A reporter called out a question. Dr. Chen, what do you want to happen here? What would it take for you to unlock the building? Margaret turned to address the reporter, but her words were clearly meant for Richard. I want 3 things. First, I want a genuine commitment to review and reform the customer service culture. Not a corporate press release. Real action. Real change. Second, I want the employees who treated me and others poorly to be held accountable, not scapegoated. This is a systemic problem, which means the system needs to change. And third, I want assurance that the values this company was founded on will be restored to their proper place at the center of every decision this company makes. She turned back to Richard. Can you commit to that? Richard felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. This was more than a crisis to be managed. This was a moment that would define his legacy as CEO. He could give the standard corporate response, promise investigations and reviews, and hope this all blew over. Or he could do something different. He thought about the numbers Gary had quoted earlier. Stock down 18%. That was going to get worse before it got better. The board was probably already discussing whether to replace him. Playing it safe might save his job in the short term, but it wouldn't save the company. Dr. Chen, he said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. You're absolutely right. About all of it. I took over this company 3 years ago, and I focused on the wrong things. I inherited a legacy, and I treated it like a balance sheet instead of a responsibility. He looked at the employees gathered around them. I'm not going to stand here and make promises I can't keep, but I can tell you what I'm going to do right now today. First, Derek and Amanda, the employees who treated Dr. Chen so poorly, are suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation. If that investigation confirms what we already know, they'll be terminated. Some people in the crowd nodded approvingly. Second, I'm authorizing a complete review of our customer service protocols and training programs. Dr. Chen, if you're willing, I'd like to ask you to lead that review. As a consultant, name your terms. Margaret raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Third, I'm reinstating the complaint escalation protocols that were disabled, and I'm creating a new position, Director of Customer Experience, who will report directly to me. That person's job will be to make sure we never lose sight of the fact that we're in the business of serving people, not just moving them around. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But more than that, I want to make a commitment to all of you. He addressed the crowd directly now. We're going to bring back the values that Dr. Chen and Walter Price built this company on. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be hard work. Some of you might not like the changes, but I believe it's necessary, not just for our reputation, but because it's the right thing to do. Margaret watched him carefully, and Richard couldn't quite read her expression. I have one more thing to add, Richard said, and now he was looking directly at Margaret. Dr. Chen, you said that someone disabled the escalation protocols 18 months ago. I want to know who made that decision and who approved it. And I want to know why no one on my executive team thought to mention that we were hiding customer complaints from leadership. His executive team shifted uncomfortably. Good, they should be uncomfortable. Margaret finally nodded slowly. That's a good start, Mr. Thornton. But you understand that words are cheap. I've heard plenty of corporate promises in my 30 years here. The question is whether you'll follow through when the cameras are gone and the media moves on to the next story. I understand that, which is why I want you involved. You're the one person who can hold us accountable. You know this company better than anyone. You know what it should be. I'm retired, Mr. Thornton. I left this life behind, I know. And I'm not asking you to come back full-time, but I am asking you to help us fix what's broken. Not because you owe us anything. You don't. But because you care about what this company represents. Or at least what it used to represent. The silence stretched out. Everyone was waiting to see what Margaret would say. Finally, she spoke. I'll agree to consult on the customer service review, but on my terms. I work remotely, I set my own hours, and I have complete independence to investigate any aspect of customer experience I deem necessary. That includes showing up at airports unannounced, traveling incognito, and reporting directly to you with my findings. No filters, no PR spin. Done, Richard said immediately. And one more thing. The consultant position comes with full administrative access to all systems. Not symbolic access. Real access. I need to be able to see what's really happening, not just what people tell me is happening. Richard hesitated for just a moment, and Margaret caught it. You're afraid I'll lock you out again, she said, a slight smile touching her lips. The thought crossed my mind. Mr. Thornton, I locked you out to get your attention. I have it now. I don't need to do it again, but I do need the access to do the job properly. Otherwise, what's the point? He extended his hand. You have my agreement. Full access, complete independence, and direct reporting. Welcome back, Dr. Chen. She shook his hand and the crowd erupted in applause. It started with the older employees, the ones who remembered her, and then spread through the entire group. Even some of the reporters joined in. Margaret pulled out her phone and typed in a series of commands. All around the building, there was a series of electronic clicks as the locks disengaged. The lights in the lobby flickered back to life. The screens that had displayed the lockdown message now showed the normal Apex Airlines welcome screen. "Your building is unlocked," Margaret said. "Try not to lock yourselves out again." There was nervous laughter from the crowd. As people began to file back into the building, employees kept stopping to speak with Margaret. Some thanked her. Others apologized for not recognizing what was happening to the company culture. A few of the younger employees asked if she would share her story with them, help them understand what Apex used to be. Kevin from accounting approached with tears in his eyes. "Dr. Chen, I should have spoken up. When I saw that video, I should have said something." "I'm sorry," Margaret put her hand on his arm. "You're speaking up now. That's what matters." Richard watched all of this, and for the first time since the crisis began, he felt something like hope. This wasn't going to be easy. The board was going to be furious. The stock price was probably going to drop further before it recovered. There would be lawsuits, bad publicity, and months of difficult changes ahead. But for the first time in his 3 years as CEO, Richard felt like he was actually leading something worth leading. Not just a company, but a purpose. Margaret caught his eye across the crowd and gave him a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement that he'd taken the first step. Now he just had to prove he could take all the others.